Hi, my name is Beth, and welcome to my February 2024 Reading Journal Wrap-Up. As usual, I'm starting with my February cover page. I'm using some cactus-themed scrapbook paper for this spread. I cut these pages out last year because I was going to use them for one of my 2023 cover pages, but I changed my mind and I never used them. So I figured I would use them this year, especially since they were already cut out and ready to go. The background of this paper is a really pale pink, and February is a pink month, so it just felt right. I'm once again adding a quote on the left-hand side, and this quote is from a book I read last month, Butter Honey Pig Bread. The quote says, "I'm sure your brother-in-law is handsome under that bush on his face." This quote made me laugh when I read it, so I had to include it. February is always the hardest month for me to pick a quote for because I'm restricted by my January reads. For future months, I don't really care when I read the book I'm quoting from, as long as it was read in that year. But obviously, in February, I only have January as an option, so it can be tricky sometimes. As I'm setting up my cover page, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all the responses I've had from my first few videos. Both videos have so many more views than I expected them to have, which is very surreal to me. And I've really enjoyed seeing your engagement as well. Some of you shared your thoughts and opinions on the books I read last month, and it was really exciting to read about. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you. But with the cover page done, we can move on to the first book spread. The first book I read in February was At Night, All Blood is Black by David Diop, translated by Anna Moskovakis. I wish I could tell you when and where I heard about this book, but I honestly don't remember. I added it to my Goodreads Want to Read list a while ago and just decided that I should read it this month. Even though I can't remember how I heard about this book, I kinda wish that I had not heard about this book. Ugh, that sounded a lot harsher than I anticipated it to sound. But it's kind of true. This book is a historical fiction about a young man named Alpha. He's originally from Senegal, Africa, but he's recruited by France's military to fight in World War I. His childhood best friend, Mademba, is also recruited, and they go off to fight together. The book opens with Mademba being killed on the battlefield and Alpha witnessing his friend's death. He immediately feels a sense of responsibility for Mademba's death, and that guilt, mixed with all the horrors that come with being at war, is the final straw towards Alpha's descent into instability. He goes on this journey of vengeance, but he loses himself along the way. I feel like this book had a really great setup. The death of Mademba was shocking, and the way Diop wrote about it was truly devastating. It's graphic, and it's sad, and you don't even know either of these men because it's only chapter 1, but it's hard not to sympathize and grieve alongside Alpha. And even the beginning of Alpha's quest for vengeance is interesting. Again, it's violent, and it captures really well how war changes people. This book is only 145 pages long, but I struggled through the last 100 pages of it. There were many times that I considered just putting it down, but because it was so short, I figured it was worth finishing. For me, I think this book's biggest downfall is its repetitiveness. While I thought the beginning was interesting, the story eventually starts to repeat itself. There are even some chapters where Alpha will recall an event in detail, but then he will explain all those details again a few chapters later, as if we didn't read it the first time. And the thing that really bugged me the most was the phrase repetition. There are certain phrases that appear many times throughout this book, but the most irritating one was God's truth. Like I said, this book is only 145 pages long, but according to brave Goodreads users who took the time to actually count, The phrase God's truth appears around 150 times. Every paragraph in this book features at least one God's truth. I saw someone mention in a Goodreads review of this book that the phrase God's truth is normal in Senegalese language and that it's used very similarly to how English speakers will use the word like as a filler word. I'm not sure if that's true, but if it is, my problem with that is that writers don't write how people actually speak. If they did, all dialogue and internal thought would just be a mess. There's a reason that characters in media speak as if they know exactly what they're going to say. It doesn't work if they speak how real people talk, and this book proves that. I decided to create a bit of a mismatched spread inspired by both France and travel. I sometimes like to do this, so I use up some of my materials that don't get used as often. I was particularly inspired to do this theme based on these stamps. They aren't the best quality, but I wanted an excuse to use them. To be totally honest, I don't love how this spread came out, but I mean, they can't all be winners, so. I think I was just mostly thrown off by the stamps. I don't use stamps that often, so I'm not very confident with them, but it's all good. It's a learning experience. The stamps and all the stickers I used were from Amazon. I learned from my last video that I'm too new on YouTube to be able to link products in the description box, so I'll see if I can figure something out. I'll still list everything, but the links might not be there. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I was really put off by some of the language in this book. Specifically, it was the sexual language. The trenches in this book were always compared to the female body, and I found it very uncomfortable. It did seem at times like the book was objectifying women's bodies by valuing them solely for sex. I understand that not everybody will agree with that, but that was just my experience. Overall, I gave At Night, All Blood is Black 2 stars. It started strong, but there were just too many things that gave me the ick. The next book I read was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I remember when this book was making its rounds online and literally everyone was talking about it. I'm pretty sure that Gabrielle Zevin even went on The Tonight Show. That's how big this book was. A friend of mine gifted me a copy of this book for my birthday last year. She read it and figured that I might also like it, which is interesting because I would say that her and I have relatively different tastes in books. But since it was already kind of on my radar, I was intrigued. Long story short, the hype is real, this book was great, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is about two friends, Sadie and Sam. They meet in a hospital as kids and they form a friendship out of their shared love of video games. Years later, they reconnect at university and they decide that they want to create their own video game. This game serves as the beginning of a long-lasting partnership between the two as they continue to develop and produce games under their gaming company, Unfair Games. Over the years, we see their triumphs as individuals and as a company, as well as their struggles. Sam and Sadie are bound by a world of creativity, but sometimes being work partners and best friends is more complicated than they anticipated. I seriously loved this book. It almost feels like a coming of age, except the characters aren't children or teens. But it is a journey of growth and friendship, and what that friendship looks like when its limits are tested. It's a success story, an underdog story. I was rooting for Sam and Sadie the entire time. Even when they had arguments and weren't speaking to each other, I knew they'd work it out. Individually, they both felt real, but together, their friendship was genuine. When they did fight, I found their feelings to be honest. I understood and respected where each of them was coming from. Unlike lots of other book characters, these two communicated, albeit for better or for worse. I do want to mention that there was a student-teacher relationship in this book for a period of time, and I really did not enjoy that. but it ended relatively maturely with the recognition that it was wrong, so it wasn't enough to spoil the entire reading experience for me. I'm not sure if anyone has made this comparison before, but in some ways, this book reminded me of A Little Life. I have my own opinions on A Little Life, but regardless, both of these books highlight the progression from university life into the working class world and fame. They don't shy away from what it's like to be successful and what it's like to fail, both professionally and in one's personal life. They also both feature protagonists with mobility-related disabilities. However, what this book did better, in my opinion, was make relationship developments that actually felt realistic. We also have important characters being carried through the entire narrative. Marx, Sadie and Sam's mutual friend, is almost like a third main character, whereas JB and especially Malcolm get left behind. Additionally, I couldn't help but think back to The Starless Sea during my read of this book. I read The Starless Sea in January, and one of my critiques about that book was that Zachary, who's supposed to be this big video game fan, never incorporates his passion into any of his decision-making. But this book did everything in that regard. The characters recognized the similarities between real life and a virtual one, and they approached conflict with video game logic. I chose to decorate this spread using a cozy gaming sticker sheet from Ikigai Papier. It was just too good of an opportunity, so I had to use it. The two frame stickers that I used in the top right and bottom left corners are from an Etsy store called Pictopod. The washi tape is from Hobby Lobby, and the butterfly washi stickers are from a bundle I got on Amazon. The paper pack that the purple paper is from is just from my local dollar store. I always try to get scrapbook paper from the dollar store because I've learned the hard way that paper is really expensive. I once again used the brush pens from Nota to write out the title. I definitely struggled with this one, but I'm forcing myself to keep trying. Whether I like it or not, I'm going to get better at using the brush pens. I also got a few people asking about my pen in my last video. I'm using the Zebra Sarasa Gel Pens from their vintage color collection. They are easily the best gel pens I've ever used. I would highly recommend them. If you haven't checked this book out yet and you like contemporary coming-of-age stories about friendship, fame, and love, you should definitely pick this one up, even if you don't know anything about video games. I gave Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow 5 stars. I am very happy that I hopped on the bandwagon for this book. I definitely think this one is worth it. The third book I read in February was Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. One of my reading resolutions for 2024 was to embrace rereading. Specifically, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to revisit some books that I read in my first year of being an active reader. I was a latecomer to reading, so year one for me was 2017. I read Call Me By Your Name towards the end of 2017, and I figured that this book would be a good one to start my rereading journey with because it was one of the books that I gave 5 stars to. And of all the books I read in 2017, this one reflects a lot of what I still enjoy reading today, and I figured that there was a high likelihood that I would still enjoy this book. And I'm happy to say that for the most part, I was right. Call Me By Your Name recalls the life of a young man named Elio and the events that happened one summer in the 80s when he was 17. An American university student named Oliver moves into Elio's parents' home in Italy to work on his manuscript for 6 weeks, and Elio is enamored by Oliver. Elio spends a lot of time trying to play down his feelings, but eventually the two begin a very brief yet very real romantic relationship. There are a lot of really great things in this book. I think the book's strongest asset is its ability to depict desire. Elio fully understands that he shouldn't want Oliver, but he can't help himself. He makes strategic decisions to be closer to Oliver or to try and convey that he isn't interested. Elio's pining is an emotional and physical thing, and his feelings are all-consuming. I do think he goes a little overboard at times, like putting Oliver's swim trunks on his head and the infamous peach scene. But I do think that this book perfectly captures what it's like when young people have crushes and experience love for the first time. I also think the writing is really well done. The environment is alive, the people feel real. This book is filled with beautiful passages and lines of dialogue. The events are never epic or grand, but the story moves at a really great pace and it keeps you intrigued. Something that I think is interesting about this book is that you aren't supposed to think that the characters will end up together. Their time together has an expiration date before they even meet. They are different ages and at different places in their life. They live across the world from each other. They are two young men in the 80s. At its core, this story is a forbidden romance. Whether you like them together or dislike them together, you know that it's temporary. I read the sequel to this book when it came out a few years ago, and to this day, I don't know why it exists. It's just so unnecessary to me, and I feel like it ruins the memory of love and the heartache that this book was trying to establish. For the spread, I decided to change up my lettering for the title of this book. Rather than my typical cursive, I chose to mimic the font from the movie poster. I wasn't totally sure if this would work, but I ended up really liking it. I don't see myself doing this for every book that I read, but I like the idea of changing it up every once in a while. I decorated this spread with a cozy cafe sticker sheet from Lollipop Studios on Etsy. I also used this very cute cow sticker from Sleepy Red Bean on Etsy, and the coffee notepad was from a stationery shop, The Aesthetic Studio. Like I said, when I first read this book, I gave it 5 stars. But upon this reread, I will not be giving it 5 stars again, and it is primarily due to the last 25% of this book. The story changes its direction by having Elio and Oliver go to Rome together, but this whole section just feels very boring to me. It's poetry reading and storytelling and walking around, and it isn't very exciting. I decided to rewatch the movie after I finished my reread and was reminded that most of the Rome trip was completely cut from the film, which I feel validates my feelings on this. I also think that just generally the ending dragged on for way too long. It goes farther into the future than I think is necessary. Again, the film cut the ending early, which to me makes for a much stronger ending. I ended up giving Call Me By Your Name 4 stars. This is a really intense story of temporary love with a lot of strengths, but it falters in its ending. And that is it for my February reading journal wrap-up. I would say that February was a pretty good reading month. I'm happy with what I read, and I made really great progress with my reading goals. I read a book from my TBR, I read a translated book, and I reread a book. So I would say that February was pretty successful. In other news, I'm considering branching out and making some content that isn't strictly reading journal related. I was thinking of maybe starting with a bookshelf tour, but I'm not 100% sure. I guess we'll just have to see. But thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.